My characters, like 90% of my characters I play are fighters. Fighters wearing chainmail, fighters wearing plate armor. If there is one creature that is the fighter's worst enemy, it is the one that can rust every item the fighter is holding.
Now, rust monsters. Oh man, if you ever gave your party too many magic items, this is the best fix. All jokes aside, there's something so fascinating about a creature who survives strictly by ingesting inorganic matter. They derive all of their nutrients not by eating living things, but by eating metals and rocks.
The party is adventuring through the Underdark Ori tunnel and they run into this giant insect that is eating their armor and weapons. Rust monsters are such a classic, iconic monster to throw at especially low-level parties where if they don't have magical weapons, they better not use them around that rust monster or it's going to start nomming on them.
You know, one of my favorite things about rust monsters are that Gorgons are terrified of them. You know, the creatures that are made out of metal and breathe a smoke that turns creatures into stone. Yeah, those things are terrified by rust monsters. So I see adventurers that go out and like randomly get a bunch of them together in order to fight the Gorgon, and it just being terrified wets the floor and leaves.
Players are never really worried about being eaten by a rust monster. Getting their armor and their weapons, particularly their magic stuff, getting rusted and being useless, yes, they're worried about that. The problem is that one or two rust monsters are never a big issue, but if you have an entire herd of rust monsters chasing the party, then you get a situation which is a bit like the Benny Hill show, where everybody climbs on something nice and high and you just watch them either running around or climbing up something in a continuous circle.
Yeah, the Rust Monster is probably one of my favorite low-level monsters to use in Dungeons & Dragons. Just the simple fact that it forces your players to be a little more careful if you're using Rust Monsters with other creatures or more intelligent creatures as like their guardians and stuff. You can really change the dynamics of an encounter. It also is going to force your party to have to think about having backup weapons, especially if they know there are rust monsters in the area. They're going to have to spend some of that gold they've earned. And in fact, one of the really cruel things you could do is give them a ton of gold before all this and then just destroy all their equipment.
They're kind of orange, rusty colored, big hind legs like a grasshopper, a tail, and these large antennas on it. The paladin bows up and says, "I've got this, you guys stay back." And as he notices the dwarf is really backing up, he goes right at it, hits one with his sword, and he kind of recoils as he sees his sword is starting to break in front of him. It has cracks in it. All of a sudden, one of the monsters hits it with its antenna, and a foot cube wide of his armor, his brand new plate armor, just dissolves right in front of him. Now fear hits his eyes as he recognizes the terror of fighting a rust monster.
Rust monsters are a unique way to make your players panic a little bit. They might think they're rationing their resources for combat and everything, but then rust monsters appear and they have to be careful, especially the melee characters in the group. You could lose your armor, lose your weapons, and if you lose those, you could lose your life to the rust monster or to the next thing that comes up.
Rust monsters are always going to make the melee party members cry, as your weapons and armors are going to be damaged. The worst thing about them early on was, not only would they damage you on their turn by biting into your weapons and armor, but even hitting them constituted having your weapons getting damaged. And this didn't only apply to mundane weapons, no, even magical weapons were damaged. So these things were just an absolute nightmare to deal with.
Rust monsters are at their best in the lower levels of the dungeon, because characters are going to survive an encounter with a rust monster. But after that encounter, when they no longer have a metallic weapon or their armor or their shield, and they realize that they need to go 2 or 3 levels back up to the surface without anything to protect or defend themselves, that is when the real fear and anxiety of the character and the player are going to set in.